Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Mike Glover Show. On this podcast, we got Chris Piehota. Chris is a former retired FBI agent, and I know what you're thinking. An FBI agent? He's an FBI agent that was one of the good ones that went through 25 years of experience from 9/11 to 2020 and saw all the ins and outs of that entire institution falling apart. And he talks about it in his book. He talks about how we need to get back to culture. We need to get away from woke ideology and bureaucrats in the FBI. And he talks about how to do it in his book called Wanted: The FBI I Once Knew. So, really good podcast. Also, I want to say a big shout out to my sponsor, The Wellness Company. The Wellness Company is a company that provides prescription medication where you can get it sent to your address, to your home, without seeing a doctor. You don't even have to video conference a doctor. You just have to fill out an intake form. And an example is this fill kit that I got has all the prescription medications for all the basics, including an EpiPen. Like, it's very difficult to get an EpiPen. So not just for preparedness, sitting on a shelf for the worst case scenario, but also just everyday ailments where you don't have to deal with the broken institutions in the healthcare system. You could actually just have it delivered to your door. Use my coupon code Glover and also see the link in the description of this podcast. And now on with the podcast. Chris, I appreciate you coming in, man.
Oh, Mike, thank you. And I appreciate some time with you and your audience.
It's not probably very common nowadays to have me talking to an FBI agent retired in any format based on the litany of circumstances. Right. But your entire book and all the perspective that you're coming from is about changing a lot of things, right?
Right. The FBI, in its current iteration, kind of moved away from what the FBI used to be. And what I tried to do with this book is take some of the ways that I was taught to be an FBI agent by what I call the old breed agents. They taught me how to behave. They taught me how to conduct the business of the Bureau. And they also taught me what the Bureau should be in their eyes. And they were the keepers of the faith, right? And us new guys came in and we were told this is how you'll do things. So what I wanted to do was capture some of that in this book. But I also, the way I wrote the book, I put it in 3 sections, right? The first one is where I learned how to be an FBI agent.
Your journey.
Yes, pretty much. And but also I tried to put in there, it wasn't just about me, it was about here's what I was taught along the way more than anything. And then the second section, here's where the FBI kind of ran off the rails a bit. And here's how it happened. Here's where it started. And this is kind of where we got to today's state, which isn't very favorable in a lot of people's eyes. And then the last section of the book, I talk about how do we get it back on track in an expedited fashion without shutting the Bureau down. The Bureau can't be shut down. It has too many essential functions, and the world is getting more dangerous by the day. Instability everywhere. We cannot have our FBI's operational capability minimized or somehow hamstrung by a reorganization effort. Has to happen on the fly.
Yeah, I want to get into that. We had just talked before we started recording. You know, I was a big fan of the FBI as a kid, like reading the books, the Paladin Press, small like floppy books that had like FBI, HRT, SWAT, special forces, all these books. And I always looked at, especially the hostage rescue team, as like the premier CT, counterterrorism force. And I was like, man, that's the unit that I want to be in. And then when I got in the military, I often operated with HRT guys. I've done free fall train ups with them. We've done cross training.
Right.
I used to have the guys come down to Carson. We would give them access to ranges and help. I've even assisted in helping team leaders train regional SWAT teams because they would send like an HRT guy. I would help the HRT guy, and then we help them go through the house, these regional smaller SWAT teams from the FBI. And I always had a good opinion, a favorable opinion of the FBI from my time overseas, whether it's analyst, working with tech guys, SIGINT guys from FBI, biometrics guys, or HRT guys on target. And I've stood shoulder to shoulder in gunfights with HRT guys. And that, for me, changed based on some of the things that I was involved in, of being targeted by, it wasn't as big as a deal if it wasn't leaked to the press and became this big thing.
Right.
But it's just the insight of like, man, these guys right now are focusing their attention on seemingly people, responsible, law-abiding citizens who they think are a potential threat when there's actual threats. And that whole thing weirded me out a lot and made me change my opinion of the FBI, but definitely not the guys who do the job, especially the hard job in HRT and some of the other offices in the FBI.
Well, what part of the problem, and this is what I wrote again about this, is that the FBI has undergone some foundational changes over time. Since 9/11 is when it started. And then over time, you see the FBI has shifted and drifted into certain cultural places that are far away from what the FBI once was. The leadership environment is completely different than what it used to be. Even when I was leaving in 2020, the leadership environment was changing. It was one of the reasons why I decided to go when I did. I felt like I no longer fit there. Again, I was a product of the old agent, kick in the pants type of, this is how you're going to conduct a director's business, to now we were worried about climate surveys and corporate metrics and KPIs and what have you. And then the last part, the operational practices of the FBI have changed as well. So, and that's what I wanted to talk with you a little bit about today and share with your audiences. We have to get a message out to say the FBI, what it is and what it should be, are two different things right now. And I think to find the answer, we got to go back and look at what it was before. When the FBI was one of the most trusted and revered organizations, along with our Department of Defense, right? And now DOD has its own challenges, but the Bureau is not well trusted. I saw a survey on TV the other day, only it was like low 40 percentile of people think the FBI is doing an excellent job. Less than half of the people, which is unacceptable for one of our primary protective organizations. Even worse than that, if you identified yourself as a Republican or a conservative, only 26% felt as though the FBI was doing an excellent job. That's just untenable. The FBI conducts its business and it exists under the trust that the American people provide to the agency.
Well, let's get into it.
Sure.
How did you start your career in the FBI? Where did you get started, and what was your motivation for getting into the FBI?
I wasn't one of those guys that I always wanted to be an FBI agent my whole life, right? Some people grew up, watching Dragnet and everything else, and but that wasn't me. I had gotten out of the military. I served 6 years with the Air Force. It wasn't the real military like you guys.
Oh, Air Force is real.
But
Coast Guard isn't real.
Yeah, but I catch a lot of heat from guys when I say I was in the military. So no, that's a good alternative to the military.
It's a corporate world.
Yeah, and so I spent a few years there and got out, but I went into a technical field in the military. I used it instead of college, right? College wasn't a thing for me at the time. So I went to the military, learned a good technical skill, and then I worked in the space shuttle program for a while. And after we saw that the space shuttle program had kind of reached its peak and it was on the other side. So I thought, what do I want to do? So I had figured out, I want to go back to some kind of service, mission-oriented environment. Shuttle program was great, but it wasn't military. It wasn't law enforcement or anything. So I was in the National Guard in Florida. I was going to officer candidate school. I had already tried to go back in as a helicopter pilot. I had passed all the tests and everything. And I also decided I want to try law enforcement. I wanted an honorable profession, right, that I could make a career of, and my kids would look at me later on and say, hey, I'm proud of my dad type of thing. So I put in some applications at different places. The FBI was just coming out of a 3-year hiring freeze. And so I went and took their exam. A couple months later, they called and said, hey, interested still? And I didn't know this at the time, but this is like a company record on how fast they can get people in. I said, sure. And they said, well, can you be, this was on a Monday morning. They said, can you be here this Sunday? So I had to quit my job at the Space Center, pull my stuff together, and go to the FBI Academy within a week.
Whoa.
So, and then 3 weeks later, I got my official welcome to the FBI letter.
Wow.
So I was out there on a wing.
That's super fast.
I mean, I was on a wing and a prayer, right?
Yeah. They say it's like a year process now.
It's a year and a half to 2 now.
Wow.
So, we're not in those exigent circumstances anymore, and they're not, looking to bring people on like they were after 9/11. But I joined because I wanted that mission environment. It was the best thing I ever did. The FBI was a fantastic organization, but again, it changed over the years. The culture, the leadership, and the practices changed. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more on exactly how. But when I got to the Bureau, it was right after the first World Trade Center bombing in 93. I got in 95.
Wow.
So the Bureau is still wrestling with that a little bit.
In New York, were you?
I was in Newark, New Jersey.
Newark, okay.
It was the runoff of New York, right? Yeah. But I was on the other side of the river in Newark. And I always tell people, if you really want to characterize Newark or New Jersey, everything shitty in the world starts in New Jersey. It passes through New Jersey or it ends up in New Jersey.
That's true.
Right? So it's just how it is.
Yeah.
And then people laugh about it because they know it's true, right?
Yeah.
I don't mean any, malintent toward New Jersey people, but it's just true. So, I was in that office, learned an immense amount of things about national security and counterterrorism because it was a top 10 office at the time. It still is. And I got to work with a lot of international partners in that, being a new guy. I mean, I had a great mentor agent and taught me how to do everything properly. But I was there when the 9/11 incident occurred, and that tragedy of that morning. I looked out my office window. Somebody came running up the hall and said, "Hey, an airplane hit one of the towers." So I look out the window. You could see the smoke rising. I didn't see the strike directly, but you could see the smoke rising from the first tower strike.
Wow.
And I thought,
from your office.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I thought, oh my God, that's terrible. People, hope not too many people were, you think it was a small commuter jet or somebody really was having a bad day.
Mistake, accident.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what everybody thought.
And then when the second one hit, we knew it was go time.
Yeah.
And, we spent the rest of that day just kind of in shock. And then we spent the rest of that night into the early morning rounding people up for interviews in Giant Stadium. It was insane.
Was counterterrorism a tenet of the FBI at that time?
No. It was hate to say it, but it was a low priority kind of bastard stepchild organization. The FBI was still a cops and robbers organization, right? The world's premier law enforcement agency.
That's right. White collar crime and
bank robberies,
yeah.
Violent crime. We were still in the drug business. I mean, we were doing drug work. We were doing all kinds of stuff, and that all went away after 9/11. But cut that program way down, and the FBI's priorities, number one priorities, became counterterrorism, counterintelligence, cyber issues, because cyber had just become a problem. Then everybody looked around and said, hey, these computers, this ain't going away, right? And so cyber issues became another part of the priority infrastructure of the FBI. I think violent crime is number 8 national priority.
Wow.
So a lot of things in between violent crime and the top echelon.
Yeah.
But when I first got in, though, the FBI was still trying to place that square national security peg into the round law enforcement hole. Everything to them was a law enforcement issue, and they didn't have the ability to see that operational horizon. They weren't able to see what was coming for us, and that's kind of how 9/11 happened. It wasn't anybody's fault in particular. I think the organization itself just didn't have the vision. It didn't have that predictive, protective culture that it has now, because we want to anticipate and prevent, not respond, if at all possible. So that's kind of the world I walked into. It was still G-men, violent crime stuff, Silence of the Lambs, that kind of stuff. And terrorism was not fashionable at the time.
How did you guys transition from banks, robberies, especially? I remember like Dragnet, good example. That's all the focus was. Criminal organizations, all this high-level crime, violent crime. How did that transition, and what did you see? Was there like a mandate that came down and said, hey, you guys are now covering down on some kind of CT threat, Joint Terrorism Task Force? Like, how did that evolve for you guys?
It didn't evolve. It was a violent shift.
Oh, wow.
It was an immediate violent shift after the tragedy on 9/11. The national leadership came out from the Hill and said, you will become a domestic security and national security organization, and you're going to get out of the cops and robbers business. There are a lot of other folks who can do that. And by authorities and by certain capabilities, the FBI is best suited to be that national security, domestic security agency of the time. A lot of other organizations have matured and they can take some of that mission now. But at that time, nobody else could do it domestically like the Bureau could. And it was a mandate. It was a mandated culture change. It was a mandated shift. It was violent. It was abrupt. People were scratching their heads. All the guys working in what was previously the Bureau's top flagship programs were no longer in top flagship programs. They were we were raiding manpower and money out of all the criminal programs to fund the new counterterrorism programs that had to be beefed up and had to be augmented to hit that threat environment because we were still scared, right? We didn't know if any more was coming. So we were in that prevent mode, respond mode, react mode, and not only that, but survival mode, because at the time there was such anger up on the Hill about this that they were thinking of splitting the Bureau into different pieces. They were very unhappy with the FBI's performance, and to be honest, a lot of talk about could have, should have, would have among the intelligence community. Our 3-letter partners slunk back into the shadows, right? And we stood out there and just took it on the chin. Again, deservedly, we didn't do a good job, and actually had a discussion with one guy one time. And he said, we were doing good work in our office. I said, I'm sure you were, man. But as an organization, we lost. They were better than we were. They executed their plan. And as a result, thousands of people died. And people lost their family members. They lost their loved ones. They lost their brothers, sisters, whatever. We lost. And that can't happen again.
Yeah, I remember reading about the specific failures, especially in the CIA, but the CIA won't take any blame for that. The leadership wouldn't take any blame for that. But there was errors likely made across the board, like you said, in many agencies, right?
There was enough culpability and lack of initiative to go around. The Bureau just happened to be that very public, forward-facing agency. The guys at the fort and the guys in Langley, kind of like I said, they shrunk back into the shadows. What
I've noticed over my career deploying, especially overseas, nearly every year that I served, there was some kind of deployment cycle. And when I worked with all these different interagencies, CIA, especially CIA, FBI at the top, there was always this confusion. Like I ran the Joint Interagency Technical Operations Center called the Jayatok in Balad, Iraq one year as the OIC. They had me undercover as an officer. Like I was a lieutenant colonel, which is funny because I was 20-something years old.
That's a good undercover.
They're like, you're
role.
a young lieutenant colonel. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I made rank fast.
Overachiever.
Yeah, it was funny. I think I was an E7 at the time, but they had me slotted in an 05 billet, and I was running this joint interagency cell with NSA, FBI, all the guys. They brought out representatives, and I was running this thing, and we would have guys rip in all the time, and there was just a lot of confusion to who is in charge of what. And especially the biggest confusion for me from running this cell was it seemed like many of the agencies, including the FBI, CIA, had the same job or the same specific title and authorities, and then the task and purpose. They were doing the same thing, and I was like, why don't you guys collaborate and work together? And those two agencies, especially the FBI and CIA, they never worked together.
Well,
they never did it.
Here's the problem, right? Back in the day, before 9/11, the law enforcement and intelligence communities didn't work together.
Yeah.
They didn't like each other. There was a professional disdain. Hell, sharing information was actually discouraged.
Which is wild.
Right? And that kind of led to these things all converged and led to the tragedy on 9/11. I'll tell you what the two factors are. I used to tell people all the time. There are two factors that you'll find in every dysfunctional situation like you just described: egos and turf. Right? And I told my folks and I'll talk about it later when we get into it, but I had 4 rules to live by, right? In one of the rules, I said, we will always be an asset. If we're not in charge, we're going to get behind and push. If we're in charge, we're going to pull, but we're going to be very, very respectful of who's doing what. And that was one of the things I learned from managing interagency operations like you did. I had stakeholders across the government in one of my jobs. I was the director of the Terrorist Screening Center, which I know Andy Stumpf's always asking me how he can get you added back to certain lists and
get me back on the list.
I told him I don't have that juice anymore. Maybe a while back, but I had we were a government enterprise provider, global. So I understood how I had to manage the egos and the turf, and learned how to do that. And one of the problems with the FBI and CIA is there is organizational ego. For me, it's hey, if I show up somewhere, and I used to do this when I was with the FBI, we would show up and say, hey, what do you want us to do? And either they would say, can you help us with this or that? Because we bring authority and resource, right? If it's a small town sheriff, police department, whatever, they're like, oh, thank God, you guys are here. We bring horsepower. Or sometimes they would just say, can you take this over? We can't do this, right? Yeah. Sure. At your request, we will take the lead, right? If we could for federal charges. So, but what you had at the top was a lot of egos and a lot of turf. And you know who suffered for that? The folks working on the staffs and the American people. So saw it all the time. They'd have big fights about who has primacy, who's the mission lead and everything. Doesn't matter as long as we're taking bad guys off the board. That was always my opinion.
Yeah, that's my personal, like I saw it from the operational level. And then when I became a contractor for the CIA, I saw like what I called incompetence at the time, because I was like, why is the right hand not talking to the left hand? And why would you put a CIA contractor on a FBI terrorist watch list, according to the TSA? And this was later, I was told from another whistleblower in the FBI, he later confirmed it, that he saw my name on a list. Like I was actually technically for a period of time on a list. And I remember calling all my bosses in Langley, hey, I'm on this list. The TSA guy just called and said, I'm on this list. He literally just said it. What can you do about it? It's like, well, we'll make some phone calls, but I don't know what's going on. And there was just this thing where, like, because I was up on the radar, whether it was an algorithm or a manual analyst input, they're like, this guy is a potential threat. And it's like, I can't imagine all the allocation of resources that were potentially diverted to me, who's actually working for the CIA at the time, going overseas, where they were looking at me and even questioning me in secondary, like awkwardly, like it just doesn't make sense to me that you would go over there. And I'm like, I'm telling you, wink, wink, that I'm working for the government. Well, and it was so weird. They never sunk up.
Well, to me, it's a lack of professionalism, right?
Yeah.
And when we would have people who would come up in certain watch listing situations, we always tried to figure it out quickly, because what it does is it destroys the American people's faith in the security apparatus. When you're being harassed at the airport, you're always being secondary, you're always being brought in for interview for whatever reason, and then the government doesn't do anything to resolve it. They just like to check you every time, right? And we used to resolve those matters. There's a formal process we used to go through. One thing I will tell you, and I saw it recently with Tulsi Gabbard. She said she was on a list of some sort. And I was talking about with Andy Stumpf. And TSA has its own set of internal lists that they maintain. It may have nothing to do with the actual terrorist watch list itself. It's a separate, complete, self-contained listing that is governed by certain authorities and principles. TSA has their own internal lists that they maintain for airport security, airline security, vehicle security, facility security. They have their own lists. And Tulsi Gabbard was on one of them. And Tulsi Gabbard was found that she was on one of the TSA internal lists. She wasn't on the terror watch list, but everybody defaults to that because it's what everybody kind of knows from the media.
Yeah.
Right?
Interesting.
But she was on a watch list that was TSA's. So when you came to the FBI, you're going to say, why am I on a watch list? You're not. But why am I being watched? Why am I being this? TSA can do that on their own authority.
Interesting.
So you might have been, I don't know for sure, but you might have been on one of those internal TSA lists of somebody who, hey, when he's here, we know he's a prominent person for these reasons. We might have gotten an intel note. We just want to watch, whatever. You get the special love and attention at the airport, right? And what I try to tell folks is when that happens, you got to say something about it. you got to go through that redress process, right? And you say, hey, why am I getting all the love and attention from folks at the airport? And then you go through this process, and then what we used to do is come out and say, you are not identifiable with the screening selectors that we are interested in, but you have a similar name, date of birth, travel patterns, a whole bunch of well, we don't use that word, Mike. Profile, man, that's a bad word, but a operating model that we might have, right? You might hit, and I used to tell folks, you know how many people in the world are named Muhammad Khan, and they're born on certain dates, and they come up every time.
Yeah,
I mean, it's unbelievable how many people have very common names and groupings of dates of birth that they get hit by the algorithms. The algorithms give you kind of that latitude back and forth on dates of birth. They spellings, they give you the soft, what they call fuzzy logic on some of that stuff. So you're not trying to evade the screening process by changing one or two letters in your name. It'll catch that. So it could have been one of those, despite Andy's glee that you were, being harassed at the airport, it may not have been the actual terror watch list. One thing I will tell you is when I heard about the intelligence products that they were doing out of one of the field offices, again, to me, that's another show in that decline of the culture of the Bureau for thoroughness, accuracy, due diligence, right? That analyst didn't write that on their own and publish it on their own. There is a chain of supervision that has to approve that. So somebody else thought it was okay up the chain, at least two or three of them maybe.
Yeah.
So, but what is incentivizing that type of thought process, in my opinion, it's that declining culture. It's the leadership's afraid. They're scared to turn it down. I used to turn things down all the time when I was in charge of a field office. I had a role like Jim's, but I was in Buffalo, New York. And they would bring me stuff, and I would look at it and say, I don't even know what this means. I work here, and I'm confused. What is this? How do you justify making these claims? And they would either say, oh, okay, we'll go back and get, we'll back it up. We'll get some more information. Or they would say, we don't have anything else. And I'd say, well, that's not going out anywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
So they're afraid to make those decisions.
They're afraid to make those decisions now because they're just so risk averse.
That's it.
That they'll let everything fly and, see if it sorts itself out. And
the worst part of that, and where I went to Langley and I actually just started knocking on doors at the Office of Security, the OS, is I had an air marshal sit next to me on a flight, and he came in, he moved down the line. I saw him migrate, skipping people, and then slivering in right behind me, one person behind me.
Yeah.
And then he was printing, which is horrible. But I mean, I was vetted by a lot of guys in the OS at the farm that were former air marshals. And so I saw him, and I sat down on the aisle, which I typically sit, and he moved past me and sat down in the window. And he actually, whether they bookmarked that seat in advance, there was some kind of shuffling that took place. He sits down next to me, and as he moves past me, I can nearly see the outline of his holstered pistol. And I'm reading a recoil magazine, like a tactical magazine. And I just look at him because he's side-eyeing me. And I'm just like, really, man? And he was just kind of taken back, like, what? And I was like, seriously? Like, is this really happening? Like, I can't believe. And it was just a pinnacle because every single airport, including that trip, CONUS flight, after my rotation from, at the time, Yemen, I was pulled into secondary every single time, even with a sergeant major military uniform in my bag, being questioned about it. And it was just frustrating. And I get it. I get the politics behind it, but it's just frustrating.
But to me, it's that lack of professionalism. It's a unwillingness to solve the problem. No, we'll just run the process indefinitely.
Yeah.
Because no one wants to say, I stopped this. Because then there's maybe, say it breaks bad, maybe you are a bad guy at some point. Maybe Mike Glover takes a bad turn, whatever. They're going to say, who stopped the surveillance on him? And next thing you know, my name's on something, and nobody, there's such fear. And you know what's interesting is I wrote about that in my book a little bit. There was an instance where former Director Webster of ours, the FBI director, he was at an evening function and that I had attended. And as I'm leaving the function, I see a bunch of people standing around out on the sidewalk, kind of milling about. And so I walk over and say, hey, what's going on? And at this time, I'm a very senior person in the organization. I mean, we were considered in the senior executive service ranks.
Yeah.
And we'd have been like 4-star equivalents,
Yeah.
right? So I walk over and they're all like, oh, hey, and I see Judge Webster standing in the middle of this group of people. And I say, what's going on? Oh, we're trying to get him a ride back to his office over on K Street. And I said, why don't you just give him a ride? They said, oh, we're not allowed to. I said, what do you mean? They said, oh, yeah, we asked OGC, which is our legal counsel. They asked OGC if they were allowed to give him a ride, and OGC said no. So I said, so I'm thinking to myself, so you asked a lawyer who has no supervisory authority at all, and they said no, and you guys are good with that. And it showed me again that the culture in the bureau, the old guys would have just said, hey, we're giving him a ride.
Getting it done, yeah.
Right. So what I told them, I said, look, I'll give him a ride. So I went and got the government car I was using, picked up the judge, curbside. And one of the guys who was there with me, he came walking out as this kind of gaggle, and he's a former Navy SEAL guy. He's a super dude. I said, hey, wait here with the judge. Let me go get my car. So he waits with him. He stops traffic. I get the judge in the car. I drive him across town. Drop him off at his office. No incident. No jerking around with the lawyers. Everything was fine. And what I saw, Mike, was a group of people who they're charged with the protection of our population, and they're scared. They're scared of administrative violations. They're scared of nonsense. Like, who would call them into question about giving the former director a ride? I don't know. If it was one of my people, I would just tell them I told you to do it. Right? You know, I'll elevate any kind of nonsense up here, right? And this is the questions I asked. I said, how do we expect FBI agents, and this can go for anybody in your former career, anybody in other protective roles, how do we expect FBI agents to make hard decisions, to go to dangerous places, to do dangerous things, or engage with dangerous people on our behalf if all they are is scared every day of getting in trouble? And that's the environment that has kind of developed over time. People are so scared of compliance issues. I remember one time, Mike, I was up in Buffalo. I'm the head of the office. I get a call from headquarters. And nobody likes getting a call from headquarters, even though I was from headquarters. You know, why don't you have any compliance reports? I said, we're good. I said, if there's anything happens up here, we take care of it. We correct it, and we teach our guys not to do it again. Oh, but you're supposed to report those. I'm thinking, come on, man. Stop it. Our guys are going to be afraid to do anything. And that's the culture, again, that has it became more important to measure mistakes than it was to correct the mistakes and train the people to do better.
Yeah. That's wild. Just to clarify, the FBI did make a formal apology to me. We had a lead out of, I won't say the lead for the office he worked for, but he came out of Boston. He was the lead of a big component of it, and came into Sig Sauer when I was there and apologized to me. And I said, are you just saying that because you're an agent? He's like, no, I'm actually on behalf of the FBI. I'm making a formal apology. We'll get to the informal part of it, but I want to say, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And he was an old school dude. He was like, he probably grew up, you likely know this guy.
He was probably embarrassed on behalf of the agency.
He was. Yeah. He said he was. And, there was several, I believe, FBI HRT guys who wrote notes that were leaked as well, that were sent to that specific office who tried to put me into this whatever category. And we're like, you guys need to cease and desist. I've worked with this guy. I know who he is. He's a patriot. I've analyzed his stuff. Like, stop. And they,
but again, Mike, that was incentivized somewhere.
Yeah.
If it wasn't incentivized, it wouldn't have happened. And that's where they started with the whole domestic violent extremist movement. They coined that term, and anybody who, had a Gadsden flag, you had your American contingency.
That's right, yeah.
All that stuff was lumped together and saying that you're ultra right. All this terminology came out.
Yeah.
And you're looking at this, and, again, I'm at the end of my career, right? And I'm looking at this saying, what are you doing?
It's wild.
What are you doing? And I used to do this when I worked counterterrorism early on, right? And people would come in and say, we want to open an investigation. Okay, what's your predicate? What's your predication? And they would go through all of the, well, pretty much they're Muslims. I said, okay, but substitute Christian for Muslim. Substitute another term, would you still do it? And if the answer is no, you may want to work on your predication a little bit. Because if you're talking about criminal activity, if you're talking about intelligence activity in support of terrorism or whatever, you can't just focus on somebody's nationality or chosen religion. That's not what the FBI does.
At what point did this change? Because it seems like there was a thing that happened.
9/11.
Very specific.
9/11. Yeah. They deprioritized all of what used to make the Bureau what was the Bureau. Right?
Yeah.
All the G-men, all of the dragnet type of mentality was pushed out. It was deprioritized. It was minimized or just discarded. Right. The new FBI was taking charge, and I understand that we had to change for the new threat environment. But they took everything that was still good about the Bureau, and they threw it out to make room for the new corporatized Bureau, right? And one of the biggest mistakes I saw as I was coming up the chain of command was the Bureau is not at its soul similar to Netflix or Google or JP Morgan as an organization, mission, whatever you want to call it. And those are the leadership practices they started importing at the very senior level. They would go out and benchmark private sector organizations and say, well, how are these guys doing business? And, they would come back with all this, emotional intelligence and transformational leadership and all this other stuff. And if you didn't sacrifice yourself on the altar of these new management religions, you weren't going to get promoted.
Wow.
Right. So it started happening after 9/11. It really accelerated at the last couple of years of Director Mueller's time. And then through Jim Comey, really accelerated. And then when Comey was removed by the president, Christopher Wray came in, different guy, right? More hands-off, kind of arm's length on things. Comey was more hands-on in the middle of everything. Two different guys. But the leadership of the organization below the director, all of the career guys and ladies, they had bought into some of this other corporatized stuff. Well, they forgot what the mission of the FBI was. It became more important to have really nice PowerPoint slides and count stuff and risk scores and climate survey, issues. And I'm thinking, and my question was, are we breeding generations of timid, ineffective leaders who are well-liked? Or are these measures that you're putting in place helping the FBI become more effective and efficient at combating national security threats and crime problems? Because that's what the Bureau does. At its core, the Bureau combats national security threats against the United States and its people, and we also then combat crime problems that affect the United States and its people. That's what the FBI does. All the other peripheral garbage that they get into and all the what I would call second tier, third tier issues at best have now taken equal prominence with investigative excellence. And when I wrote about a couple of the FBI where they ran off track, one of them was just a complete debacle. I'm sure you've heard of this. It was the Olympic athlete sexual abuse case out in Indianapolis. A doctor who worked for the Olympic Committee.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that. Ooh, that was
abusing these young ladies.
Yeah.
They called the Bureau directly for help, and the response was so inept, indifferent. I was ashamed as an FBI agent that the leadership of the office allowed this to happen, that the Bureau allowed the office's culture to exist in the organization that allowed this to happen. And the fact that these young ladies, these guys did such a bad job. The IG report, which is what I reference as the IG report, said that it was abysmal. They didn't do investigative work properly. They lied. They tried to cover up things. One of the guys who was in charge of the office was trying to get a job with the Olympic Committee. So they think that might have influenced some of the depth of investigative activity, right?
Wow.
But why did that happen, Mike? And it was that follow-up over the years, the leadership environment. There was a guy I worked for. In the book, I call him Patton, because that's what he reminded me of. But after 9/11, man, this guy was brutal. He was brutal. And his idea was, this is not a time for us to take a step back and reflect. This is not a time for us to lick our wounds. This is a time for us to step up, even become more capable and intense. He was exactly what the Bureau needed. People didn't like working for him because he was so intense. But we just had our tails kicked. People died, and, the Bureau wanted to go in that, well, you're having trouble staffing things. We got to get a nicer environment here. I'm thinking, this is a wartime environment. And if the people here can't handle it, you got to get some different folks, right? Put them back out in the field. Put them back out somewhere where it's a little less maybe intense or a little less draining to the human person, right? But yeah, this guy, he was hardcore, and they marginalized him. They brought in all the, the transformative leaders and the servant leaders and all that garbage. Yeah, people liked them better, but we weren't necessarily a better organization. And then those people moved up the chains, brought those ideas with them. It's the same thing you see in the military now. The guys in charge, they're all Obama years officers. They brought all those
political activists.
Exactly. Well, it's happened in the Bureau too, to an extent.
Yeah, I recently, over this whole thing I went through with DCFS, Department of Child Family Services, I made a complaint to FBI office out of Salt Lake and got blown off. I mean, they basically blew it off. And it was interesting because in the conversation I had, the number one priority, according to this young officer, this young special agent, was government corruption. That's what he said. He said government corruption is top of the list for the new. And I don't. Who's the director right now? Still Chris Ray?
It's still Christopher Ray.
Yeah, and he said that government corruption was a specific issue. And I said, oh, well, that's perfect because this is government corruption, and they didn't have any. And so I lay all this case out, which is very compelling in my mind. And he's like, well, I don't want to disappoint you, but, we don't have the resources. We might get around to it. I'll let you know. He never let me know. And then 2 months later, a 12-year-old young man, a young boy, dies in northern Utah from malnutrition after multiple complaints to DCFS. They never followed up. They didn't do their job. It's a horrible organization. Good people, very specific people that work in it, but horrible organization. They don't have a great record, period. But I was interested in that because I'm like, if government corruption is what you're looking for, this is a very specific situation where I kind of analyze this, talk to lawyers, and they tell me to come talk to you, and you guys just blew it off. And I think to myself, I wonder if there's any course correction here with this kind of mindset where it seems like they're focused on so many things that aren't protecting people or the issues that are dealing with people. When you're targeting parent-teacher conferences to go after moms who are infuriated by trying to co-parent their children with the government and all this corruption and this woke ideology, and the FBI doesn't look and investigate the actual issue that she's talking about, they look at her, I just go, where do you restore trust in something like this?
Yeah, it's it's an interesting thing that you bring up is that the FBI, a lot of people think, I'll put it in two ways. A lot of people think the FBI is either omnipotent or that we are clowns, right? And the omnipotence crowd thinks that the FBI can do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, to anybody it wants. And the clown said that you guys can't do anything to anybody ever. You guys are ridiculous. And I think what happens is, in an instance like yours, when you make that complaint, I don't know who you spoke with. They have what they call intake complaint duty. I don't know if you were given to one of those people.
Yeah.
They generally take a position of, and I'm sure that you can relate to this, big cases, big problems, small cases, small problems, no cases, no problems. And for something that you're wanting them to look at, he said, we don't have the time or resources. The fact that he said that again shows me that's a product of poor or no training. And the fact that you're saying that there could be a corruption issue in this state agency, they could at least give you the courtesy of saying, come in and see us. Let's sit down and talk about
Yeah.
this. Let's figure out what could be done. And I'll tell you this much too. There are times where people don't understand that the FBI cannot investigate everything. It has to be a federal statutory matter, right? But the FBI is very influential, even in matters where all you got to know is like, hey, man, we're going to look until we find something. So you guys need to clean up your act a little bit unless you want us to come back. And a lot of times that's all it takes. They're like, hey, we don't want you guys in our business.
Yeah.
Right?
He seemed disinterested.
That's what I'm saying. It's that culture. And I actually coined a term in my book about it. I called it bureaucratic indifference. Right? Bureaucracy, okay, I get it. It's everywhere. But the indifference you get where he's not trying to protect people. He's trying not to get in trouble. He's trying to live by the check boxes in his, what do I have to do on this? I offered this, I offered that, I took his phone number, I took his contact info, check the block. Yep. Done.
Yeah.
Right? And to me, that's not serving the people. And even if you would have came in and he would have sat with you or somebody else would have sat with you and said, tell me what's going on. And they would have said, look, Mike, there's no federal issue here, but I'll tell you what, we're going to call these people and here's some people for you to talk with. And this is how you put some foot to tail on this thing.
Yeah.
But we can't do anything directly, but we can help kind of push you in the right direction.
What he said is,
Right?
I can't do anything specific. I'll look into it, but here's the number for the IG. And I said to him, I said, listen, the IG for the organization is the organization. So they're looking internal to their own organization. So the Department of Health and Human Services out of Utah is not going to make themselves look bad by an internal investigation through the IG's office. And so it was completely blown off. And I'm like, and I tried to relate with him. I'm like, what if your son was taken because of a clerical error? Because that's essentially what happened.
I know. I watched your story and I was horrified. Listen, I actually wrote on something. I don't usually write on things, but I wrote and I said, Mike, never talk to the police.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting. Everything that I teach in personal defense back here in our shoot house and where I typically bring in law enforcement officers and we do scenarios is changed a lot based on that circumstance of communicating just a little bit. Because I'm like, there's certain things you got to say, certain things that you don't have to say. And then I realized, don't say anything at all. Don't say anything at all because it doesn't benefit you.
Nope.
And in many cases, even when you're right, it just extends or elongates the process or just causes more issues overall.
Yeah, I think, and again, if you look at, and I write about the FBI because that's my primary.
Where do you do that at? Where do you write about?
I mean, I've actually just been on some podcasts. I've done a bunch of interviews and articles because of my book and that. But when I wrote about the FBI in my book, I try not to get into too much of the political stuff. But when I'm looking at the law enforcement culture as a whole, the FBI is one of the bellwether organizations. People tend to follow what the Bureau thinks is good practice, right?
Hey guys, this is sponsored by Fieldcraft Survival, and I want to give you a pro tip, so bear with me. The pro tip in personal and home defense is how do you secure live, one round in the chamber, firearms securely and safely away from children and people that are in your home, but also readily accessible and secure. Well, here's one of the boxes that I have. It's called Pine World. We also have a stop box, several stop boxes in the house. This one uses biometrics to access a firearm that's hot and ready to go. This one also uses a code and a manual key. Now, the drawback for something like this is I can't grab this and maneuver to a safe place in the house just to buy time. I have to go through this protocol. And that protocol takes time. Another one that we use is called Stop Box, where you grab it, there's a certain manual key code on it. And for children to a certain age, it's nearly impossible for them to access it. Not only protecting children, but having a readily accessible firearm that you could use in personal or self-defense. If you find this interesting, we have an entire series built out for home defense on the Fieldcraft Survival app. I'll make sure I link it down below. Thanks, guys, and back to the program.
And I think the Bureau hasn't led well in the last several years, especially after the initiation of the COVID environment. It really kind of accelerated the FBI's kind of decline.
Is that when you left?
I left in 2020 in January. The world fell apart in March.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Right before it fell apart.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, the law enforcement culture, just like that guy you talked to in Salt Lake, are they there to help you and solve problems, or are they there to give you procedure and policy? Somebody told me this one time, it was a long time ago. There are some people who get justice, and there are other people who just get the law. And what are you doing here? Are you trying to help people fix the situation, resolve it, help them manage their difficulty? Now, I know cops, a lot of them, they're not social workers, and they might be a bit out of their lane, but when you show up, you're there to resolve conflict on one level or another, whether it's, the whole force continuum, right? So either you're talking, you're laying hands on people, or, whether or not you have to, get into a firearm situation, right? But you're resolving issues. Mm-hmm. You're protecting people from other hazards in society. The law enforcement community is not doing that anymore.
Because of the culture.
The culture's changed. I've watched some clips on, the social media, and I'm thinking, who thought that was a good idea? Where did these people get taught to do this? What kind of chain of command and culture exists in that agency or department that allows these officers to think that they can behave that way? I watched a video with Andy when I was on his show recently, and we were watching these two supposed FBI agents go up to a house, start talking to a guy. This guy was ready for him too. He had his phone out. He had his Ring camera. He lit these guys up.
Oh, I remember that.
Right? Tore them
They
up.
wanted to drive it off.
Yeah, they actually, after a while,
Yeah.
they just left. Right?
Yeah.
They got back in their car and left. And I was telling Andy, I was like, first of all, that whole thing was a disaster from a training protocol. And I don't even think they were agents. I think they were task force guys. I think they were local cops on the task force, but I don't know for sure.
Which is commonplace, right? For the FBI.
Yeah. I mean, use it as a manpower. It's a manpower boost, right? You can get 10, 12 guys from the local PDs, work with your agents. Yeah, you double your manpower.
And they get it sworn in.
Well, they get deputized as
that's right.
U.S. Marshal.
Yeah.
The marshals give them a deputation. I used to swear people in for it. You read them through all the thing. They sign some papers, and you deputize them, right? So they can operate under that federal umbrella. But those two guys showed up, and this guy was belligerent on the front end, right? He was ready for them.
Yeah.
But Mike, if I show up somewhere and I'm an FBI agent, and I show up to your house and you say, hey, and I tell you I am Chris Piehota, I'm from the local FBI office, and we would like to speak with you about a couple of issues that came to our attention. And you say, hey, can I see your credentials? And I say, sure. And I show them, and you say, okay, right? We're off to an okay start there. We kind of, when you say to someone, no, you can't see my credentials.
Which is wild.
Okay. That's not how the business is usually done.
Yeah.
Right. And then the rest of the argument those guys had with that homeowner was just awful. Right. They were unprepared. They were unschooled. It was embarrassing. And that's happening more and more and more. And I'm thinking, does the Bureau understand that its brand is being diminished with every one of those incidents that gets out on the TikTok and Instagram and, whatever your other, social media of choice is? The brand of the Bureau is being diminished over and over and over again. When you think of FBI, what do you think of when people show up places? What is your mental image as soon as I say, hey, FBI people are showing up? What is your mental image?
They're showing up in suits, super clean cut, squared away, professional.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what everybody's image used to be. And now we get a couple of guys that
Blue
show
jeans
up.
and
They
a
look
tactical vest.
They look like they came out of a bowling alley.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And and I understand, hey, there are times when you're not going to be out in your suit because you got to go out in the community and you got to do certain things, and maybe wearing a suit's not the best tactic to get in there and talk to people, right? So I understand that. But when you're going to somebody's home and you show up and you're a professional, and I hate to use the word humble, it's overused, but if you're just a considerate federal agent, say, hey, ma'am, don't mean to interrupt your day too much, but I've got to talk to you about a few things. You have a few minutes. We need your help on just sorting a few things out. We don't have to come in if you're comfortable standing here and talking to us. That whole thing, well, can we come in? No, you can't come in. I don't know you people, right? I've seen it happen over and over, and I think it's a training issue and it's a cultural issue where and here's why. I guarantee it. I've seen it. The supervisor on the squad doesn't want to talk to those two guys and give them a chewing because he doesn't want to get it from. They'll go back and complain to their chief. The chief will call the head of the office, and then he'll get his butt chewed out for counseling those two guys.
Wow.
Right?
So any reprimand, any consequence, any kind of like hip pocket, like spot correction, that's not even going to be done anymore because it's so sensitive.
Everybody's so hypersensitive on everything. One other thing I'll share with you that broke my heart. Right after I retired in 2020, the BLM stuff was kind of rolling, right?
Yeah.
They were kind of having their thing. In D.C., they were marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, and you're familiar with D.C., they have Lafayette Park. It's right by the White House, right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. For some reason, the FBI had a contingent of agents standing in Lafayette Park. A bunch of them there with their FBI web gear, bulletproof vests and 511 pants, standard type of stuff, and FBI hats. And as the BLM folks rolled past, and again, I wasn't there, I've read about it and I saw the pictures. As they walked past, the agents took a knee. That was that popular thing then. You took a knee for the BLM folks, right? And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, what was that? What was that about? Why would you take a knee? Why would you show an overt preference for any social issue, right? And I wanted to know, who was in charge? Who allowed that to happen? All of them got down and took a knee. FBI agents in FBI gear.
Wow.
Right?
Hope they had their knee pads. Wouldn't want them to get injured.
I don't know what they had going on, right? But the fact is that it happened. I was telling, I wrote about it. I said, the old agents would have kicked our behinds. We would have gotten murdered for something like that. They would have told us, you can't show overt preference or bias for social stuff. You can't do it, right? Again, destroys the brand of the Bureau. That was devastating for the FBI, right? To see that happening. What do you think the organization did? Instead of kicking some tails, they gave them gift cards to a coffee shop. One of the the organization, the FBI agents organization,
they rewarded them.
They actually commended them. They told them that they diffused the situation. And again, culture.
We would have fired all of them. If I was in charge, I would have fired all of them.
Mike, we would have
fired myself. Probably.
We would have had our heads handed to us, right? If not on the spot, there would have been some guy running out of a crowd, to kick some tails. But what I found was interesting about the whole thing was that, the organization kind of gave them some, you guys did the right thing and everything. And I said, what should have happened? Here's what should have happened. If they would have stopped the BLM folks, I don't even know if they actually stopped and said anything. The supervisor should have, or whoever was in charge, should have walked up and said, hey, folks, glad to see everybody out here today. We're from the FBI. We're here to make sure that you can all voice your opinions in a respectful, safe manner. We're going to be right here if you need us. So keep moving on so we can keep everybody moving. That's it.
Yeah.
Right? Friendly, but keep moving. We don't want to get any traffic jams here, but we're right here if you need us.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, that's the right answer. Yeah.
That's it. Easy. But again, I think some of the leadership is now leaning towards some of these social issues, which then brings you back to are they still apolitical? Have they taken a stand on certain things? Have they leaned toward the more liberal side of society as the Bureau? And those are tough questions. And they're going to say no. But that doesn't seem to be how can I put it? I heard it the other day. What is it called? Acta non verba? Deeds over words? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because that is the exact model of kind of the corporate scene.
Yeah.
Whereby they do a job. You might be in a very specific duty and responsibility that has nothing to do with your political ideology because obviously if you're working a job, it's very specific. You're a laborer. You're a retail manager. You do a thing. And then when you intertwine political activism with doing the thing, it typically gets in the way of doing your job. So if I'm a boss and there's somebody who comes in and they're being a political activist and not packing shipping boxes to get people's orders out the door, then I'm going to fire you. Well, but it's like, where did that get lost? Because
you can't do that anymore, right? And here's the problem. I'm not only not packing my boxes, but I'm riling up everybody else who's no longer packing their boxes.
Yeah, the entire organization becomes a political
I become a cancer in the organization.
Yeah.
So
where did that come from? Because I think when I look at the history of the FBI in my lifetime and the intertwining of politics or politicians, I think of Comey. Comey stands out, and I'm sure there was a lot more before him.
It started toward the end of Mueller's time. And Mueller was not a political guy. He ran the organization with an iron fist, which was needed.
Yeah.
Right? After 9/11, I mean, we were shaky. He came in, put a very firm hand on things, and he was a frightening man to be around.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to go to these meetings with the senior folks, and they would bring us along because we were the detail guys. And you could see the fear sweat in the room. I mean, just the sweating bullets being around Mueller because he was tough. And he didn't tolerate nonsense. He didn't tolerate ineptitude or silliness, nothing. I think when Comey got there, he saw the organization was exhausted. The FBI was exhausted. It'd be almost like looking at our military after 20 years of war. There's some fatigue in the organization. I'm not talking about the people specifically. It might be there too, but the organization's fatigued. And that's what he saw. So he tried to lighten things up a little bit. And to his credit, now Jim Comey was a good guy to work for, very affable, always had a smile on his face, very personable. Meetings were no longer like, oh my God, you're sitting there just waiting to get skewered. And the meetings were, lighthearted and everything else. And people weren't scared to death anymore to make little mistakes. Well, you know what happens when little mistakes get common? So do big mistakes and bigger mistakes. And things become, then you start drifting toward mediocrity. And that happened in some places in the organization where, Jim Comey was a believer in everybody should be heard. Okay, sir. But when you have people on the lowest level of the organization emailing you directly, it causes a certain chaos in the organization that he doesn't see. He may be aware of it, but he doesn't see it. Now everybody's scrambling around trying to figure out what's going on. And then those people who have low-level beefs, hey, they have a direct line with the director. You know? Yeah. And he encouraged that stuff. Nobody would have ever emailed Mueller directly. They were just horrified, right? So all that stuff started changing under Comey. He tried to lighten the mood. He tried to make it a little more of a friendly work environment, which again, I got to be fair, it was needed to a point because the organization was exhausted. But it drifted too far. And then the senior leaders, in order to please the director, took it a little further, right? And then you start hiring like-minded people, Mike. And then you get this wave of multi-generational hiring that came with it. All of these people we're hiring are from the universities. And that's where you get a lot of that.
Was there DEI mandates back then when that was going on? Or was
the Bureau it started drifting in that direction before the term DEI was even coined. The senior folks started becoming a lot more concerned about now what we call DEI elements in the organization. Well, how many women are there? How many minorities are there? How many a specific minority? They started becoming very concerned with that because the FBI got hit with some lawsuits early on. And they lost because they didn't have good practices. And, folks were able to show that the FBI may not have promoted people because of their gender or their racial background or whatever. I will tell you this, though, just as a clarifier. I spent 25 years with the organization. I never once, not one time, ever ran into a situation that was based upon race or gender. Never. Not once. And I was on a board, a promotion board, when I was in my later part of my career. And there was a lady who was in for a position, and she was super smart, squared away lady. But what they did to her, they being the senior leaders, they would always send her into environments and say, hey, that's a mess over there, go clean it up. So she would. She'd go in there and kick tails and square things away and make sure things were good. And then they would do it again. Hey, she's good at this. Send her over here, over here, over here. Well, then she puts in for this position, and we're looking at it was an SES role. And they said, well, she has sharp elbows. What does that mean? What are you talking about? I said, you are the ones who send her in there with a mandate to fix things. And she fixes them, and there are going to be people who are disaffected. And then they complain, and now she can't get this position. They said the culture started changing. Instead of rewarding her and saying, hey, you did a great job. We need more people like you who are going to get effective mission-focused programs that are going to actually have outcome and not be so worried about the climate surveys and all that garbage that they instituted, that people became very afraid to do anything. There was a joke about it, Mike. No hard decisions ever got made between November and March because you didn't want to get any climate survey payback.
Wow.
Right? So people would just say, you know what, we'll work on that later, or just ignore it because they didn't want to get the bad climate surveys. My contemporaries would argue with me all the time. Oh, that's not true. I'd say, yeah, it is true. You just refuse to admit it.
Yeah. Was the climate survey done at the lowest levels? And then was it basically a command climate survey? Were they looking at the leadership specifically or the culture?
No, they were looking at the leadership
Yeah.
and the culture. And then it was a bottom-up type of a survey where the staff would pretty much rate their management and rate the culture in the organization. So if you were disaffected, man, here's your counterpunching. And I always knew when I could see it. I used to read them for the people who were my staff members, and I could see counterpunching immediately. I could see it. This is nonsense. It's pettiness. It's, this person is the worst manager and they're mean. And okay, right? How are they impeding you from doing your job? Well, but that's not it. I just don't like that. Okay.
Yeah. Personality conflict.
Exactly. Now I will say that there are probably a couple of folks who may have gained some insight, maybe a little bit of reflection, and maybe it made them better managers. But I think that's the minority of people who were affected by those climate survey exercises.
So not a great benefit.
I would say it actually had more detriment, but you'll never hear that, and you'll never see it written down because they won't ever admit the fact that they created these generations of timid leaders who were more concerned about what score they got on their climate survey than actually resolving organizational problems. And I used to tell people, when you let some of those problems go, it's like having rust on a car. You can spray paint over it, but it's coming back. And it's going to be worse than before. And that's what people would do, At
the end of your career, you're a very senior member of the FBI. What was that specific position? And then kind of give people like the understanding of how that relates in the hierarchy of the chain of command of the FBI. And what were specific things that you were able to do in your position to change the culture as best you could before you left?
Right. The position I held before I left, it was called an executive assistant director. There are 6 people who hold that title in the FBI. The FBI as an organization is divided into 6 branches. On each one of those branches is led by an executive assistant director. My boss was the deputy director, and his boss is a director. So we were on the third line of authority in the organization.
You were like the joint chiefs ahead of all the organizations.
Like you had the SecDef, you had the associate SecDef, and then you have all the folks across the top.
Yeah.
That's where we were.
Okay.
And my branch was the science and technology branch.
Oh, really cool.
It was awesome. It was great.
Yeah.
Great branch. We were an enterprise service provider, technology, scientific aids for the investigative folks. And I had about 5,500 staff members and anywhere between 1.5 to 2 billion in formulation, execution of budget. I had more people and money than the entire ATF.
Wow.
I had more people and money than the Marshal Service. And I was a branch in the Bureau. To just tell you how big the FBI is compared to the other DOJ elements. So we were a service provider for the entire Bureau. We provided them with 3 areas of product, Mike. One was the operational technology division, which we did all the James Bond type of stuff. All the cool stuff you see on TV, that's what these guys do. The second area was the FBI laboratory. Laboratory division, premier law enforcement criminal laboratory, CSI basically for the FBI.
DNA, biometrics,
firearms, ballistics. We do all the crime scene workups. You see those folks show up, shooting reconstructions.
Yeah, FBI is the world leader, especially on internal, external, and terminal ballistics.
Right.
Every special operations unit goes to the FBI for that.
You have a shooting incident, you probably want the Bureau involved if you want some good third-party objective forensic work. They also had the Terrorist Explosive Devices Analytical Center down at Huntsville, which is the FBI's joint initiative for counter-IED work with DOD and some foreign international partners. And then the third one was the Criminal Justice Information Services Division. And all three of those ones they're all national asset programs. The guys out in West Virginia, they maintain all criminal records, all criminal justice information, biometrics. If you ever hear people on the old cop shows say, run that through IAFIS, that's those guys out in West Virginia.
Massive database.
Oh, massive, right? NCIC is what the cops are looking at when they pull you over. Then they're up there, doing this stuff. They're looking at our databases. So we maintain all of those as that trusted arbiter of criminal justice information out in West Virginia for the whole nation. So lots of impact everywhere, lots of service. We used to do it for the law enforcement community, and some of the intelligence community would come to us too for support. And it was a great job. I enjoyed it. When I got there, the previous the previous EAD had requested to go back out to the field and work at a field office, head of a field office level. Because that job has it's a burnout job, right? So the director calls me one morning and he says, hey, I'm going to change your world. And I'm thinking, this could be really good or maybe really not. Bad. Maybe not so good. Maybe he's telling me, hey, I want to see your retirement papers soon, right? But he said, I'm going to make you the new EAD for my science and technology programs, because he liked the way that I could take very complex things and put them into very direct, simple discussions. And he was an attorney. So he was like, all right, look, I'm a lawyer, right? Smart man, but he didn't necessarily have the technical background that you have to understand what goes on nowadays, right? Everything is based in some sort of information technology or digital tech. Right?
It changes every day.
Right. And I had all that background from my time with the Air Force and then working in the space shuttle program. So I saw the programs. They were operating in kind of an old model, right? Not bad, but old. Just the business environment had overcome them. So we started making new approaches. We started asking the leadership. We actually changed out some of the leaders and, make sure that we had some good quality folks. Leadership exercise, not let's put the smartest person in charge of the smart people, which is what usually happens. We took some people that we wanted in leadership roles. We want you to lead the organization to a certain set of objectives, practices, and cultural values, beliefs. Yeah. And by the time I left, I had 4 rules to live by. I used to keep a massive whiteboard in my office, and I used to write on it, and there's a bunch of other stuff on it. I think I might do a follow-up book on just that whiteboard.
Yeah.
Just how we ran things. But part of it was the rules to live by. And I made up these 4 rules over talking with my folks and hearing complaints over time and watching just shortfalls. And just first rule is tough shit. Bad things happen. Things don't always go our way, but we don't buckle. We don't fold. The FBI leads. We figure things out, right? Well, we handle things. People depend on us for that. Second rule, if it doesn't suck, we don't do it. Because if it was easy and readily managed, other people would have already handled it, right? If it comes to us, that means it's complex, it's dangerous. Or somebody's already screwed this up beyond belief and they need somebody to bail them out. So when the American people or anybody is in trouble, they're scared, and things really suck for them, they should always know the FBI is their best bet. The third rule was assumption is the cause of bad things, right? We can't assume. I say the business that we're in is too important to assume things when we can test for outcomes, when we can do research, when we can look for validation. Because on the extreme end of things, Mike, I mean, we make bad decisions, people die. There's loss of life, loss of property. I mean, it's bad. On the easy end of things, things may not get done on time, may get some embarrassment, whatever. So I said we always test for outcomes wherever possible. The last rule is always never be a liability. I said no matter what we're doing, if the FBI shows up, everybody should be glad to see us. They should know that we bring horsepower, right? And if we're not the best at something, we're pretty damn good. And what we have to be able to do is, like I said earlier, when we're in charge, we pull hard, but we're considerate to other people who are in the mix. If we're not in charge, we push. and we provide horsepower for whoever is in charge. We're always looking for work, and we're never, ever a liability. We're always an asset. So those were the 4 things I put on the whiteboard. So I said, when people would say, so we used to joke about it, they would say, yeah, I know, rule 2, and they would get it.
That's good.
Right? And if we can return to those types of thought processes, the Bureau has become very distracted by peripheral issues right now. It's lost its edge in some areas that used to make it the Bureau, right? I was having lunch with somebody a little while back. She's this phenomenal lady, just super. We're having lunch, and she said, did you hear about this new thing they're doing at FBI headquarters? No. Oh, yeah, she said, now that people there, we have meditation rooms. And if somebody's feeling stressed out, they can call a timeout, and we have to give them on-the-clock time to go and kind of de-stress themselves. And I'm looking at her across the table thinking, what happened to my FBI? The FBI we were the dragon slayers, Mike. And now these people are calling timeouts during the day. It's almost like when you had the stress card business. I
remember that. I was just thinking, that's what I thought. Stress cards.
Yeah, when you had that kind of nonsense going on. So, but how does the rest of the community look at the Bureau? And we used to be the standard.
Yeah.
And now we got people saying, oh, you know what? I'm feeling pretty stressed out right now. Can I take 10?
What?
And that's the kind of stuff that the leadership has kind of driven toward, Mike.
They coddled. Yeah.
But they've acquiesced to the new thought processes that are being brought in by the people that the Bureau's hiring. They've also not been able to navigate or resist the pressure from, I'll call it society, into being that more, I guess, kind, gentle. People use the word woke, whatever. But that whole thing is why does it have to be so hard? And that's what I tell people. Because it is, and that's why it's here. And that's why we exist.
And is it hard? Is it really hard? It's not really hard. It's just a job. And that's what you guys are supposed to be doing. And this coddling of all these social issues and these political activists, I don't see, I want to get your opinion on this because you've likely thought about it, but Kash Patel is supposedly the guy. And look, when I heard his name, Kash, I'm like, who is this guy? And his face just bothers me. And then I looked into him, and I'm like, okay, he's my age. He's got profound legal experience as a lawyer, as a federal attorney, as the directors of national intelligence go-to guy. I'm like, okay, so obviously he has a whole bunch of experience. Can he be the guy? Well, when he said on an interview, and I don't know if he was exaggerating, but I take him at face value because I imagine part of the reason that he got picked for that job is, 1, his book on revamping the FBI, but 2, his bold approach to it. He said he would go into FBI HQ with 7,000 agents, and he'd convert the following day that headquarters to a museum to the deep state, right, and kick everybody out and make them go do their job. And maybe that's analogous to getting people back to work. What's your take on it?
A couple things. One, yeah, you're right on his background. He's been in a bunch of positions across the government. DNI, he's worked up on the Hill. He worked at the National Security Council. He's worked at DOJ, SecDef office. So he's got a good general background that gives him an understanding of the threat environments that the FBI would be managing. So he wouldn't walk in from some law firm somewhere and say, okay, what is this?
Yeah, what do we do here?
Are you kidding me? That type of thing, right? So he has an idea on that, which gives him a leg up. The other stuff that he said, that makes for great podcast content, right? But once you get on the ground, you cannot simply shut down. It'd be like shutting down JSOC.
Yeah, you'll debilitate.
Tomorrow, you're all gone. Get out and fight. Go do something, right? You can't do that. Now, can FBI headquarters be leaned out a little bit? Yeah, absolutely. And I think FBI headquarters has programs in it that should be outsourced. There are some programs at the FBI that honestly, I would, if I was looking at it, if they asked my opinion, if they said, hey, if you were the director, what would you do? hey, there's some of the criminal programs, I would jettison them to the marshals.
Yeah.
Secret Service does a lot of white collar crime. Get them to do some of that too. If they're looking for that parallel mission with their protection, which they've run into some hard times as of late
They
too.
need to be in science and technology. Yeah. They need to stay focused on.
They've run into some hard times. But we could actually take the entire mission almost of the ATF from them, or we could take our laboratory and move it to ATF. Right? There are parts of the FBI that can be. Not the entire lab. I'll rephrase that. But the ballistics and the firearms and everything, all that, move those functions to ATF. Right. So we can slim down headquarters. But the problem was after 9/11, everything became centrally managed in the national security programs. There was a lack of confidence in the FBI. There was a lack of confidence in the field offices to conduct the mission. And that model has never really kind of drifted back to field office main control. Headquarters maintained a stranglehold on resources and allocation of resources. So, I think he can go in and do some leaning of headquarters. But here's the important part about Kash Patel. We are being given an environment that is receptive to foundational, massive change. And what we do with it is up to us, right? He's willing to go in and do it. What is his mandate going to be from the White House? He's going to have a set of goals and objectives from the White House that he's going to have to hit for the president. Everybody works for the chief executive, right? In that branch of the, in the executive branch where the bureau sits under DOJ. So everybody works for the man, right? He's going to have his own expected outcomes. So Kash is going to have to hit those, and then he's going to have to. What's he going to do with these other things that he talked about? We're going to shut this down. We're going to do that. We're going to do this. We're going to just kick everybody out of the field. Here's another question for you. 7,000 people. We're going to kick them out. Where are you going to send them? Do you think some field offices could double in size overnight? Where are they going to put these people? They have desks, cars, computers. They have infrastructure for them. So if you're going to move them out, it's got to be in a phased process. Louis Freeh did it when he was the director. He kicked a bunch of people out of headquarters. But I don't think he did it in a fire drill fashion. He did it more of a hey, we're just not going to backfill these things. These positions are being moved out to the field. There was a more of a measured plan to get them out of there. Now somehow they all drifted back in, and most of it was after 9/11 because they wanted that central control on everything. But I think that he gives us an opportunity to make some foundational changes, and he's willing to do it. He's overtly spoken of doing it, and aside from the internet podcast content, I think once he sits down with a trusted group of people, and this is his most important thing, Mike. He must have a trusted, knowledgeable leadership team working with and for him that are going to align with his vision as well as the chief executive. And these people have to be dedicated to resetting and reforging the Bureau. If he doesn't have that team, he's not going to be successful. The organization will defend itself. The organization will slow roll. They'll drag their feet. He will be given smoke screens and BS like nobody's business, right? Everything's going to be A-OK, boss. That's what happened to Christopher Wray. When he came in, they isolated him. Everything was A-OK, boss. Just like when when you're in the military and you go in and you talk to, when you see the stars, everything's A-OK, boss, right? We're good to go. And that's not true. And Christopher Wray was fine with that. Yeah, okay. You guys run the organization. I'll be out here doing, this other stuff, which that is his job. But I think Kash Patel is going to have to make a very hard decision with the chief executive. How many of the current FBI leaders is he going to excuse from their positions? All of them? Remember the whole rust on a car thing, right? You leave a couple, are they going to undermine? How much leaking are you getting? How much, complaints, emails being sent to the media? You're going to have a lot of that, and you're going to have inertia, right? They're going to resist and justify. They're not going to say, hey, you know what? If these are the objectives, we understand them, but here, you want to do it this way? Can we try it this way? I think we can get there quicker. And you can say, okay, go, right? But you got to hit that objective. If he doesn't have that leadership team, he's going to struggle and he will likely run into shortfalls and failures. But where does he get them from? Because you can't You can't solve the problem by taking from the problem. So where does he get them from? I actually spoke with a lady the other day, and I said he's going to have to either bring some trusted people with him who know the organization, and they're going to be his advisors. They're going to be, he can put them into the leadership roles. The key roles are going to be that deputy director, the associate deputy director, and then those EADs where I used to sit. He's got to get those people where those are his people. If he doesn't have that, he's going to fail. He's going to fail. And he can either bring people with him, or he can bring back some retirees, right? Hey, get a couple of guys and ladies who, hey man, they're still protectors of the faith, right? They don't like this, and they don't think this is right, and they're good people. They're straight shooters, still believe in an objective, apolitical, trusted FBI, and here's how we get it back. Bring them with you. And you come in and say, this is what we're doing, folks. And Mike, if you can't do it, if it's just against your values and beliefs, we'll help you get somewhere else. If you want to stay and help, great. But you can't undermine. You'll be out of here like bad stuff to a goose, right? You're going to have to excuse some people from the organization. But I think given the proper leadership environment, given the proper modeling of leadership behavior, most of the organization will snap back into place. Most of them will. Some of them you're going to have to clean it out.
Yeah, he can't go it alone, right?
He can't. He will be isolated. How do you know you're not being fed BS? How do you know
Subverted,
you're given happy talk? Because even if you're a general officer in the military and you give out orders and everybody's saying, yeah, okay, yeah, we'll get right on that, boss.
And then go back to the same old.
Exactly. Yeah. Then 6 months later, you're wondering, hey, man, nothing's changed. You're right. But I gave the orders. Yes, you did.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that before.
Yeah, everybody has.
Yeah.
But that's why you need that hands-on leadership, Mike. You need those people in those positions that are going to look. One of the things I said on a recent podcast, or I was on CBS News or something, one of those people, I said he's got to put out a more constructive message to the organization. We're here to make the Bureau better, make the Bureau regain the trust of the people and the confidence of the people. We're going to make some changes. Here's why.
Yeah, he needs to define his purpose. Yeah.
And not only that, but we're not here to throw away everything you guys do for the American people day to day. That happened after 9/11, and I hope there are still, I don't think there's anybody left from those days, but what I would counsel him on is don't make those same mistakes. The organization was injured to its core, Mike. It was the soul of the FBI was crushed after 9/11. Right? Not just from the failure, but from all the other adjustments and changes and everything else. So I would challenge Kash Patel. Get some people in there who know the organization. Because I'll tell you what, I know where all the skeletons are, right? At least not for the last couple of years. They probably have some new ones, but all the previous ones. And just explain this to me. Why did we do this? And they're not going to be able to explain it. You know why? Because they were just, it was groupthink. It was whatever you want to call it. Crossfire, hurricane, all that stuff. Just not good leadership, not good balance on things. No opposing views. Everybody's like, yes, boss. And if you did try to say something, you got pushed out of the way.
Yeah, I think the biggest mistrust, speaking from somebody who's kind of dealt with this a little bit, and just talking to people, is it seems there's no consequence. As in, law enforcement, you have qualified immunity. And federal law enforcement, when you see gross mismanagement, incompetence, or just, outright mistakes that are being made, you don't see anybody paying the price. And it seems like, this is in line with like the Hunter Biden pardon. It's like if you're part of the clique, the group, the crew, the protected class, then you have an out. But if you're a civilian, they will burn you to the ground.
Well, what's that thing I've heard? A private will be court-martialed for losing a rifle, but a general can lose a war.
Yeah.
And have no ill effect.
Yeah, that's
right?
perfect. Yeah.
And I'll tell you what happens where the Bureau is concerned. And this is a law enforcement thing, just overall, but I'll speak for the Bureau because that's my thing, is there's a fine line you walk where human beings are imperfect. They will make mistakes. with all good intent, they will still screw things up occasionally, right? Where do you draw the line to where, again, you want people to be bold. You want them to have guts. You want them to get out there and lock horns with the bad guys. But if you make a mistake, we're going to fire you. How many people are sticking their necks out, Mike?
Yeah.
Nobody. And that's what we have now. But on the other side of that line is you can't have an environment where you can screw up repeatedly and still hold that same position and get promoted, right? Hold screw up, move up type of thing. You can't have that going on either. So that's where the leadership element comes in. That's where the culture comes in. You got to police that stuff. And you got to say, hey, Mike, we have faith in you. We're giving you this tough investigative situation because we know you have good judgment. You've shown that you have good maturity. And here's the thing. And if you need help, you got to come and see us if you're not sure, whatever. But we expect you to run this thing. People, they don't get that anymore, right? So how do you build that? How do you get people back to being those dragon slayers when they're scared? So I understand nobody pays a penalty. Sometimes they should. But where do you say, like, I always thought my job was as a senior leader was to shield my people from administrative bullshit. Oh, you misused your car that day. Don't do that again. Right? Hey, this was done in good faith, but it was outside of policy. Yeah, okay. Consider yourself counseled. Right? Don't do that again. Or am I going to take this guy or lady and ruin their immediate career because they did something with good intent within parameters, but it was just maybe a little bit outside of policy? I mean, where is that judgment? And that's where we have to figure it out. And that's where, if you take that hard line, where do you build these people who are willing to do those dangerous things, man?
Yeah, it's true. I could see the conundrum there.
It is. I'm not saying that it's right. There are people who should be excused from their positions because of just gross incompetence, gross negligence. Absolutely. But if you still want those people who are going to extend themselves and they're going to enter those threat environments and they're going to work in dangerous places, not only to themselves but to others, you got to figure, they got to know you have some sort of a, hey, my organization is going to support me if I do the right thing for the right reasons. May not be 100% correct, but at the time it was the best option, that type of thing. I'm sure you've seen a lot of those situations when you were OCONUS. You're in a war environment. Hey, man, this is what we had to do. Yeah, but Mike, that was outside of standard operating procedure, whatever. Yeah, but I wasn't going to let my guys die out there because of standard operating procedure, right? So it's a tough one. There's no answer to it. I'm just saying that I think there has to be a measured, thoughtful approach on, do we want bold, kick-ass
cowboys,
people who are going to go out and do the work for us, stand between us and monsters? Or do we want a bunch of timid folks who are going to cover their ass at every turn and kind of let us deal with things on our own?
I remember interviewing a guy named Chris, who was an HRT sniper, and he was at both Ruby Ridge and Waco. And, the FBI played a role very specific to the tactical component in both circumstances.
Right.
And it was interesting because I really didn't know the complexity of the involvement of FBI, ATF, what was it? Was it DEA? No, it was ATF agents in Waco, for example.
Right.
And I started kind of analyzing the circumstance, and what stood out to me is, like, specifically with Randy Weaver and Ruby Ridge, was that could have just been me. Like Green Beret from Vietnam, Randy Weaver was. He's in the middle of Idaho. He wants to live his best life, just left alone.
Right.
And he gets put in this circumstance over seemingly pretty silly charges. I mean, they were federal crimes, but the way it came about and the way that they looked at him as a direct threat, I put myself in his position because I'm like, when I found out that the FBI was looking into me, they did a threat assessment, and they probably said, oh, this dude's a Green Beret. He's a special forces guy. He's got a specific skill set. Mm-hmm. And they went in, and I believe it wasn't FBI agents who actually did the ghillie suit thing and were doing surveillance. I believe it might have been marshals.
You know what? I've heard FBI. I've heard there were other parties. I don't have the history down as well as I maybe should. Yeah. But I've heard there were FBI guys out there. They were in ghillie suits.
Yeah, that's right.
And the kids found them.
The kids and the dogs. So that was the hard thing. Is
right.
The dogs discovered him, and he's just a kid. He could have been my boy, and he thinks on his property. I don't even know it. It could be a bear. He lifts a gun, and a guy in a ghillie suit dumps him and kills his dog. So eventually that evolves, and his wife gets killed.
Yeah,
literally holding their child.
Well,
and then it comes out in this massive investigation that there were a lot of errors, and the FBI admitted to a lot of
absolutely. It was a convergence of a lot of. No, I'm Monday morning quarterbacking.
Yeah, right? And this is before your time.
Yes, absolutely. But looking back as a concerned former FBI agent, why were they there? What were they looking to accomplish? That would have been my first thing. If someone would have came to me and said, "Hey, we want to put HRT around this perimeter of this house," for what reason? Why would we need HRT? That's a tier 1 element.
Yeah.
Right?
National asset. Yeah.
Exactly. Why is HRT out there? Why not?
On some random dude in Idaho.
How about this? How about you call the sheriff out there?
Yeah. And ask buddies with him.
Right?
He served with Randy.
Go out with the sheriff and say, "Hey, we've heard you guys might be moving, have some guns out here. You may be able to clean that up a little bit. It's come to the attention of other people. It's a federal crime. You better get your shit together," right?
Yeah.
It may have resolved the whole thing. Maybe not, but it may have. We don't know because I don't know if I don't know. They may have tried that, and maybe he told them to pound sand. I don't know. But for me to send a tier 1 asset out there to go out and surveil, and why? So that's where I find the same thing where the FBI's recent stuff when they went down and arrested, I think it was Roger Stone.
Yeah.
70-year-old man.
Yeah.
A bunch of guys out and ladies out there with M4s and web gear and all kinds of stuff. I'm thinking, all you had to do is call this dude and say, "Hey, come to the office tomorrow.
Yeah.
Don't make us come to your house. We don't want to cause a scene with your family. Come to the office at 10 a.m. He would have showed up. Guaranteed. He would have had his attorney with him and say, "Hey, bring your attorney." Right? No problem. But why would they do stuff like that? Who's deciding that, Mike? I don't know. And when it came to the Ruby Ridge, and I read about the guy who made the shot that killed Reaver's wife. His name was Lon Haruchi.
Yeah.
And they talked to him afterwards, and that whole incident destroyed that man. Destroyed him.
Oh, yeah.
Not only from a career basis, but just personally destroyed him because he had no idea that he was going to shoot through the door, take the wife and the kid. He had no idea. Just destroyed him.
Yeah.
And the organization left him out there.
Yeah.
It was terrible.
Well, he said, it's interesting about that story is he was in one SO position, surveillance observation position, and Chris was in the other one. And Chris told me that when they got the information and they infiltrated, they didn't have any information. They didn't have really an understanding of what they were doing. Comms were very limited, and they just were told basically, you have this rogue threat. And so they're looking, and I get it from a tactical perspective because I've been there. I've flown in on targets where you expect the worst case scenario because a picture is painted by intel, and that intel's wrong.
And you almost have to.
You have, yeah. That's
right.
That's the dissemination process, right? You're getting information. It's often limited, and then you get on target, and then it's SOP. It's just a standard operating procedure. Yep. You're just exercising the same technical skill sets that you've trained and honed, and you're just doing a drill, a rock drill. This particular situation, I think, really shook. Re-looking and revisiting this thing, and then looking at Waco as well, where you got I'm a sniper. I grew up as a sniper. I was a sniper team lead. That's my world. Mostly it's observation. It has nothing to do with a sniper rifle, right? It's all observation. But then I look at snipers holding rifles, kneeling in a picture with the carcasses of children, and I think to myself, as somebody who lived that life, who fought side by side HRT agents, and think to myself, that's what Americans don't trust about these kind of organizations, because they think that could have been me. I could have been Randy Weaver in those mountains. That could have been my son. That could have been my daughter that burned to the ground with her children in Waco, Texas. And it's like, that's what you expect in a war zone somewhere overseas where people don't want to associate with. And I think that's the mistrust that's felt.
Well, I mean, think of it this way, right? These are the same people you're going to call for help.
Yeah.
The same people you just saw in that imagery that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Does that make you want to call them?
No,
I don't know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be pretty bad at that point if I'm calling these people and say, all right, well, I'm going to take my chances, right?
Yeah.
And this is one thing I always thought that the FBI and our other, the marshals and, ATF is ATF, but marshals and other folks, our FBI and marshals and other law enforcement entities should be feared by our adversaries and criminals and our enemies. So when the Bureau shows up, you've called down the lightning.
Yeah.
Right? We are in deep stuff here. The Bureau's here. We're in trouble.
Yeah.
Right? You've called it down. On the flip side of that coin should be the FBI and our other protective agencies should be respected and revered and loved by our people, saying, my God, I'm glad they're here. Because I know they're going to take care of us and they're going to save us and they're going to keep us safe and they're going to get rid of the monsters and all the criminals and just the human garbage out there. These people won't let them hurt us, right? And we don't have that anymore. That's kind of been diluted a bit, right?
Yeah, and you're spot on with that. I think that's what it is.
Do you know what I'm saying, though?
Yeah, the PR campaign by the FBI.
Well, I don't know if they have one.
Yeah, I was going to say, at this point, it's like,
I think they may need one, right?
Yes.
Here, I'll tell you this on that note, right? When I was leaving the FBI, I had my last meeting with Director Ray. I used to meet with him every morning, me and a bunch of the other senior guys in the agency. And we'd meet with them, talk about the threat issues and, all the business of the Bureau and other stuff. But I was having my last kind of formal meeting with Director Ray. And I sat with him and I said, I've been with the organization for a while. A couple of things I'll just give you for your own consideration as you move forward as a director. One, I told him the director is the primary protector of the FBI brand. You must make sure the FBI brand stays what it was. I told him a little bit of slippage there. I said, two, when people are in trouble and they're scared, there are two organizations that Americans always want to see. One is our uniformed military. Whenever you're in trouble and you see uniformed United States military, you think, God, thank you. You see those Army outfits, you see those Marines, you see, thank you, God, they're here, right? And the FBI, when you see those pieces of crap, windbreakers and, that we show up with and raid jackets and you see FBI, you're thinking, oh, thank you. We're glad they're here. I told him, I said, I'm not sure that we're doing a good job in protecting that. And then the third thing I told him was, your biggest problem moving up into your strategic issues will be your GS 14 and 15 leadership cadre. He said, really? He goes, I've never heard that. I said, well, your SES managers are going to do pretty much whatever you want them to do. They want to please. But I said, your 14s and 15s are where you're going to get those foundational cultural issues. That's what you have to make sure those people are well trained, oriented to the organization's culture, and what you want to see the Bureau be in the next 5 to 7 to 10 years. And, I used to tell people, like, these 14s and 15s, they're equivalent to lieutenant colonels and full bird colonels. And they're nowhere near those people when it comes to leadership training and capability. Not even close. Most of them. Some of them are. Some of them are. But a lot of them aren't. For them, you know what that is, Mike? That's a pay raise.
It's a bump.
That's it. So, again, culture, organization, practices, it's got to change.
What was the specific reason for you leaving? What was it? Was there a moment, or was it just it was time to move on?
It was kind of death by 1,000 cuts, right? I was product of the old Bureau, right? And we started moving into that new corporate Bureau, and then it got really just ridiculous after a while. I saw myself standing outside of a lot of conversations where I was like, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? And I found that I was on the outs with the leadership, right? And I said, okay, well, that's fine. You have peaks and valleys in that, where your stock goes up and down. But then I got to a point where it's like, I don't think this is going to get any better. I think it's going to get worse. And I felt as though if I couldn't realign and adjust my own personal beliefs with those of the organization, then I was no longer going to be an asset to the organization, and I was going to violate my own rules of always be an asset. And I decided to retire. I had 2 years left before I was mandatory. Because, as a law enforcement person in the government, you have a mandatory retirement age of 57. So I had a couple years left, and I said, let me leave on my own terms. And that's why I decided to retire in January 2020.
What are you doing right now? I mean, besides writing books?
Well, I was writing a book.
Yep.
And I've been doing consulting work, which I always tell people, don't become a consultant.
Yeah.
But you can make some decent money at it, Mike. But honestly, you're not there for the payoff. You're not part of the organization. You're a hired gun, and if things go bad, you're the responsibility trash can, right? I like being part of a high performing organization and team. I like being there when, hey, if you're going to invite me to the crash landing, at least invite me to the takeoff, right? And I like being part of that mission environment. So, consulting's great. I worked with a couple of companies. I've been doing some work with some cyber companies and everything. And I did some work with some technology firms just based upon my previous experience. But I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do, to remain active, engaged, and productive. Somebody asked me the other day if I'd go back, to DC and work. And I said, absolutely. I'd go back in a heartbeat to help them because it's not about the money. Government doesn't pay all that well. People think the government pays really well. Not all that well, right?
Never.
Some people get a good deal because they don't do anything for the money they get, but the government doesn't pay all that well. So it wouldn't be about the money. It's about the mission environment. It's about getting back and making sure that people, the American people, are getting the service from the institutions that they rely on, right? So I would go back in a heartbeat, but I'm just mostly doing consulting work now and helping people be successful and trying to figure out what I want to do full time and, just try to be productive, man.
Yeah, I hope Cash would tell, one, I hope he gets confirmed, but I also hope he reads this book because I think it would give him some insight to your experience and then also how to repair the FBI.
Well, like I said at the beginning, if you read the book, you see what the FBI was, at least to me, what it is and what it should be for the American people. That's what I talk about in the book, and I try to give people a chance to look back in time, right? And see, and I wrote it from my perspective, so I gave all the disclaimers. This is not a historical, recount of the FBI. It's my experience as I moved through the organization from street agent up to, being a very senior person in the organization.
Awesome, Chris. Well, I appreciate you. How can people find what you're doing? I mean, what are you doing on social media? Are you doing posts? Are you doing anything?
You know what? For the whole career that I had with the FBI, I worked in the national security arena. The social media was discouraged and frowned upon. Yeah. So I'm just now kind of getting out there. I post on the X platform at Chris Piehota on X. I also do LinkedIn for whoever does LinkedIn, but I do LinkedIn on that platform and. I try to talk with people who have like minds and they want to share ideas and they want to, help each other be successful. That's what I'm about. And I think here's the thing, and I think military veterans run into this as well. A lot of things I was involved with could be very beneficial to a lot of organizations from a perspective, managing risk, managing threat. I mean, people ask about competitors. My competitors were the Chinese and the Russians and Al-Qaeda. And transnational organized crime groups and other people. Those are my competitors, right? And learning how to manage in high risk, no fail environments, it kind of grinds on you after a while. And I'm sure people like yourself and other military veterans, you had that same experience. And what I find is that people say, oh, you're a former cop, you can only do cop stuff. And, we don't do cop stuff here. It's not about that. It's about organizational development, leadership, planning, execution. It's about getting people together, forming teams, marshaling resources, people. How about marshaling the energy of a group of people? When you're going to war, you got to lead. You don't manage people into battle, right? Same thing with law enforcement. Every day is a low intensity conflict for these people. Same thing for other organizations. So I want to help people do some of that type of work, like to share some of those experiences. I don't think we take advantage of that enough. I was very fortunate that I have good mentors and people who sat with me and said, hey, dummy, this is why you're doing this, and here's why we're at this point, so you could see it. So not that I think people are dumb. Maybe I was dumb. Maybe that's, but I do think that people like yourself and other people have a lot of wisdom to share if people would just be willing to listen, drop the egos, drop the arrogance, admit that we have a problem. It's one of the FBI's first steps, I think, is to admit that it has some challenges that maybe they can't resolve on their own, and then go from there. Yeah,
I think that's hugely important. We'll link all of your stuff down below, and I appreciate you bringing me this book. And we'll also link this book down below.
Thank you.
Wanted, the FBI Once Knew. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.